Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to do a review on A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I read this for the historical fiction readathon hosted by Katie at Books and Things. Now, I didn't think I would get to it, and I had actually asked you to choose me a book for that readathon because I was hosting my own readathon for the short story collections. And so I didn't think I would even be able to read anymore, but I was able to read Christie so quickly because it was such a fantastic book. So thank you for all that voted for that, because it was really a great read. And since I had more time and I had completed a lot of the prompts already, I was a little ahead on the short story readathon, that I thought I would try to squeeze this in because I am trying to read all the Charles Dickens novels. And since Katie had mentioned this one to fulfill one of the prompts, I really wanted to go ahead and read it. I was kind of confused at the beginning of this one, and it was a little tough to read. I have read Great Expectations and I've read David Copperfield, and last year David Copperfield was my favorite read of the year. I loved that book. If you haven't read it, please go get it and read that one because it is an adventure. And so was Great Expectations. I enjoyed it too. But those center around one person basically. So like in Great Expectations, you're introduced to Pip and you follow through the journey with Pip. And the same thing with David Copperfield. You're introduced at David when he's born and you go through his life. Well, this one was not that way. So at the beginning, you're introduced to a person named Lucy Minette, who has pretty much thought she was an orphan for most of her life. Her mother died when she was young, and she thought her father had died as well. But at the beginning of this story, she is told that her father is in fact alive, and he's been imprisoned in France for many years. And so she goes to France and pretty much smuggles him out. This is set in the late 1700s, around the time of the French Revolution. And so there's a lot of upheaval and just a dangerous situation. So she brings him out. So I thought, okay, this is going to be about Lucy Minette and maybe her father and their relationship. Now, I knew the ending of this story already because my sister had told me when I was in middle school the ending. And there was a movie adaptation that I saw on TV. Unfortunately, because we didn't have, ways to stream and all those things back then, I only caught the tail end of the movie. So I saw how it ended, but I didn't see anything else. So in my mind, I'm starting this book thinking about what I knew happened at the end, and it really wasn't making any sense to me because what happened at the end really wasn't connecting. So I started the book and I didn't give up, thankfully, and I tried to figure out what was going on. And the problem I had was that it skipped. So like at the beginning, I was reading about Lucy Minette and her father, and then it was like several years later we were in a court with Charles Darnay, who is on trial for treason. And so I was a little confused, like okay, well, did I miss something? But then I figured out, okay, we've skipped ahead in time. So it was like that for several chapters. I had to really kind of just read it and go back and read some portions of it to figure out what was happening. And then once I was introduced to all the characters, I kind of got into the flow of the story. And then about a third of the way through, I couldn't put the book down because it really started intensifying as we went. Now, this book is so hard for me to explain. There's so many characters, and the plot, just like the other books that I've read of Charles Dickens, there's a lot to them. They're not so easy to explain. So I tried to think of a one-sentence summary. And for me personally, I think this story is showing the best and worst in people in the midst of chaos. So basically, in the midst of chaos and darkness, will you succumb to the darkness, or will you choose to be the light in the darkness? And that's kind of what I took from this, because it is redemption and sacrifice and those kind of themes in this story. It was a mind-blowing book for me. Like I say, at the beginning, it was like all these characters are introduced, and then as you go, you're trying to figure out what in the world's going on, but it starts coming together piece by piece. Charles Dickens starts putting the puzzle together, and then your mind is blown by the end of it on how he ends up putting all of the pieces together. So my advice to you is, if you have not read A Tale of Two Cities, don't give up if you're a little confused at the beginning, because it will come together. You just have to pay attention to all the characters, and then it'll come together for you. Now, another thing that I noticed, and I'd said this about Lucy Minette, was who I was introduced to. She's really, to me, even though it's about Lucy Minette and Charles Darnay and this other character, to me, Lucy and Charles are not really the main focus of this book by the end of it. I felt like at the beginning it was more about the group, as in all the people, and how they were responding within the French Revolution during that time. And then it kind of starts focusing in on one person, because by the end there's only one person that I see that really develops any. At the beginning, this person is sort of just wandering through life. They really don't have much purpose. They really haven't loved anything really. And then he falls in love, and he has sort of this aha moment, and he changes by the end of the story. So he's the one that has the story of redemption in his plot line. For me, it was more about him at the end of the story. So that's another reason that I was a little confused to begin with, because he really doesn't show up in any significant way, or so you don't think it's a significant way, until later on in the book. When I think about Charles Dickens too, one of the things I love about his books and a lot of classic literature is they are more complex plots, and there's a lot of characters a lot of times that he weaves together. But the thing that I always go away from when I finish his book, I leave with word pictures. A lot of times when I read his books, I just have these images, because he's just brilliant when it comes to describing a scene. And so there's several word pictures that I will never forget from this. And the first one is Dr. Minette, the shoemaker. And that is Lucy Minette's father. And we're introduced to him at the very beginning. And I will never forget Dr. Minette and his sitting in this room with his bench making shoes. Now, he is a doctor, but while he was imprisoned, he made shoes. And so when they find him, when Lucy finds him in France, he's in this little room, and he is just making these shoes, and that's all he's doing. And he's pretty much almost insane from just doing this over and over again. And to me, it's just another way of responding to the chaos, to, when you don't feel like you have control of your situation, you find some way to have control. And so I think for him, because he was put away innocently, he was imprisoned for something that really he should not been put in prison for, he found this as his sort of security blanket to make these shoes. And there's another place later on in the story, once he is better and he gets she gets him out of France, and they build a life for themselves, there's another place where something stressful happens to him, and he starts wanting to make the shoes again. And it's like he's trying to just revert back to what he knows best, and that is just to make these shoes, to have a purpose, and to find something to do in the midst of this stressful situation. And so I just thought that was interesting. And so for me, I'll never forget poor old Dr. Minette, the shoemaker. Another would be Lucy Minette. She's a word picture in herself. And I know that a lot of people don't like that Charles Dickens creates these caricatures in his stories, but for me, I like that, because he's trying to get a point across, and I just think that he does because of the caricatures, and they help me remember the story. Just like with Great Expectations, Miss Havisham. Yes, she's a caricature, but I'll never forget her. And so Lucy Minette serves that kind of same purpose in this story. She is beautiful, all the men love her, and she's good, and she's almost angelic in this story. She's just perfect. She's loyal. There's a place where she stands outside this prison and she stands there every day at the same time for, you know, as long as she needs to, just so someone can get a glimpse of her in the rain. It doesn't matter what the weather is. So she represents loyalty and goodness and all things that are good. And I, you know, even though she wasn't my favorite character because nothing else happened with her, she didn't change at all, it was a great word picture of what Dickens was trying to say within this story. Another would be knitting. Now, this one is a scary one. I know we don't think of Grandma knitting us a sweater as being scary, but Grandma knitting me a sweater will never be the same after this book. In this story, there is a woman named Madame Defarge. Actually, it's a couple, and they represent, to me, the conflict within the French Revolution and the choices we make within that. And Madame Defarge sits and knits. Every time you see her, she's knitting and she's knitting, and it's not knitting comfortably a sweet little blanket. You know that there's something going on with her. You're not sure what, but it's super scary. And as it goes, it builds. As it goes, it gets creepier. As you every time she's in a scene, it's creepy. And by the end, when you discover the whole knitting and what's going on, really, it's a pretty scary situation. I think that Madame Defarge is one of the scariest characters I've ever come across in literature. There's also a scene with this wine barrel. This happens early on in the story, and when I think when I got to this scene, I started feeling the tension really in the story, because there's this wine barrel that burst outside on the streets, and the wine, the red wine, just covers the street. And as that happens, a mob just comes and starts just lapping up the wine from the road, from the street, and they're lapping it up like animals. And it was really a tense moment in the story, and it was really sort of frightening for me because it showed the whole mob mentality. And it was an introduction to how that happens. And, you know, people absolutely lose their minds sometimes within the mob. And that picture of that red wine across that street with those people lapping it up like they're animals really bothered me, and I will never forget that moment. But again, it was brilliant because Charles Dickens really was able to convey that emotion, that tension within what's going on leading up to the French Revolution. So these are just some of the word pictures that I will never forget from this story. Overall, I really enjoyed this. Again, it was difficult to get into. It wasn't as easy for me. And to be honest, it wasn't as enjoyable for me as David Copperfield or even Great Expectations. But by the end, I just can't stop thinking about it. I know that I will revisit this one now that I know the story and have a grasp on what's happening. I think I would enjoy it much more going through this time because, you know, I know the basic plot and I would be able to understand it a little bit better. And also because I have read it, I think if I went back through, I would see even more things, important points and scenes that I didn't see because I was a little confused in the beginning of reading it. So if you have not read A Tale of Two Cities, I do recommend it. I think it's a brilliant, mind-blowing story. I think that Charles Dickens is trying to show the problem with the social injustices during the French Revolution and the oppression and, you know, the reason that this happened in the first place. When you think about the opening sentence, which I love, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And then you think about that last sentence, which I'm not going to talk about in case you hadn't read it, but they really sum up the story for me. And now after I have read the story and I look at those two bookends of sentences, to me, it really summarizes what he was trying to say. And I just think it was a brilliant book. And I do hope that if you haven't read it, that you'll pick it up soon. Let me know in the comments if you've read A Tale of Two Cities or if you've read any other Charles Dickens that you think I should pick up next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.